Hi, I'm Dick Deming. Welcome. I'm Medical Director of MercyOne Cancer Center in Des Moines and founder of Above and Beyond Cancer. Welcome to our Cancer Education Series. I have a guest with me tonight that I'm really happy to have with us, someone who I've been working with for quite some time. Morgan Newman is joining us. Hey, Morgan.
Hi, Dr. Deming.
And Morgan grew up in Greenfield, Iowa. She started off her educational path becoming a dental assistant. And then she went back to school and went to the University of Iowa, where she majored in sociology and got her master's in social work. Along the way, she had a cancer journey, and we'll talk about that. And Morgan currently serves as the community engagement liaison for a cancer advocacy organization called Cervivor. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. She spells Cervivor, her organization spells it Cervivor, right? Did I spell that
That is
right?
correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, cervix cancer survivor. Welcome, Morgan.
Thank you for having me.
And Morgan and I have had the opportunity to work together on many different issues and advocacy. And Morgan also serves on the board of directors for Above and Beyond Cancer. So Morgan, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and your story. And then after Morgan tells her story, we're going to have a real conversation about some of the issues related to cervix cancer. But Morgan is involved in this organization for a reason.
Thank you. And I'll actually have a few slides to help me tell my story and to kind of give you a little visual with some pictures. If we want to go to the first slide, please. So my story began at the age of 24. I was one of your typical 20-somethings that really enjoyed being social with her friends, going out every weekend, dancing, drinking, you name it. I had started dating my boyfriend at the time, and with all new relationships, there was some excitement. Um, I wasn't showing any symptoms except for some bleeding after intercourse, which I didn't really chalk up to anything serious. So I've always been proactive about my health and would attend my screening visits every single year. For the first time, my Pap test came back abnormal, and I didn't really know what that meant. Most of my friends had experienced something like this at some point in their lives, and they were fine. So I didn't really think anything of it. But then I got referred to come back for a colposcopy, and that was an experience in itself where the testing is used to scrape off abnormal cells, and I hemorrhaged through the whole thing. So it was really difficult for them to gather the information that they needed. But they stopped and referred me to a gynecologic oncologist. Again, I didn't connect the dots on what that meant. I was 24, I seemed healthy, everything was fine. You can go to the next slide, please. So on February 4th, 2015, I went to the gynecologic oncologist consultation by myself. And I went through some testing, a quick biopsy in the office. And then I was walked into a conference room with a physician assistant and the oncologist to tell me that I had cancer. It happened to be World Cancer Day, and I'm sorry, can you go back to the slides? I was diagnosed with endocervical adenocarcinoma. I really didn't know what to expect. It was kind of like everything in the room just stopped, and people joke about hearing Charlie Brown voices, the want sound, and it's kind of true. Like, you just lose track of what's going on. So I remember going out the doors and making phone calls and letting my family know what was going on. But treatment came around, and I wanted to see what my options were for fertility preservation. I quickly became overwhelmed with information in the process. And at that time, I didn't have enough information to make the choices that would set me up for a future with children. I went through chemotherapy and external radiation, probably about 6 weeks worth of treatment. And then 2 weeks after that was internal radiation. But I was not a candidate for surgery. Next slide, please. What cancer looked like to me. The first time I went through cancer, I was able to hide my appearance. People could tell I was sick physically from something. They just didn't know what. There was still that emotional component that I was facing something really difficult, and I was young. I didn't really know anyone else around my age that had been through what I'd been through, or at least living. I did have one person that I knew from high school, and she had unfortunately passed at the age of 27. And when I think about my relationship, I quickly became a ghost, because the treatment took so much out of me. The ramifications it had on my career, I was missing a lot of work for appointments, for treatment, and because I felt sick. So it was really, really difficult. I was facing a stigma inside myself because I felt like it was my fault that I got cancer. And where I read a lot about cancer on, say, WebMD, I still didn't, I still wasn't told that my cancer was caused by HPV. I went through all of my treatment without knowing that. So there was kind of an additional layer of shame that I couldn't really get past. And then I was being stripped of my fertility. I didn't know how I would feel being at age 24, and whether or not I was really ready to start a family until after that choice was made for me. And I had an experience with internal radiation that forever is ingrained into my memory. And I can say that that is the closest pain that I can relate to childbirth, according to my nurse. So that was a traumatic experience. But cancer wasn't done with me after that initial diagnosis. I went back for follow-up scans and found that I had spots in my lungs. So I had to go through more testing to figure out if I had cancer again. And it turns out it was cancer. My appearance the second time, there was no hiding what was wrong with me. I had cancer, and I was bald. I was physically weak, emotionally. I wasn't able to really process through a whole lot until after treatment was done. And my relationship continued to suffer along with my career. But after just 3 treatments of my recurrence, I have to back up just a minute, because I seeked a second opinion for my recurrence treatment. And I think because of that, my treatment regimen really tend to work. I had 3 treatments and had a complete interval response, meaning no evidence of disease. And my oncologist loves to tell me the statistic every time I come to visit him, but he says only 6 to 9% of women in my circumstance have that opportunity. And it's a very rare conversation that they get to have. So I took that as a grace and decided to do something with my story. Next slide. So after cancer, I was searching for something to make my voice matter. I wanted to make a difference so others didn't have to go through what I went through. And I happened to stumble across Cervivor by a hashtag on Instagram. And I saw that they were hosting a cervical cancer retreat, but it was for advocacy. And that's something my values aligned with. And I wanted to see what it was about. So I did some more research. I signed up and I fundraised my way to Florida. And I don't regret that decision at all because it has led me all over the place. I happen to learn more than I have ever learned during treatment about cervical cancer and HPV and just the whole, cancer world, really. So I became a patient advocate by becoming a survivor ambassador. And I said yes to every opportunity I could, making community partners here locally in the state of Iowa and volunteering to go lobby at Capitol Hill and all this stuff. So I really wanted to end the stigma that we face with HPV. Next slide, please. So you'll see I blossomed because I took this opportunity and I felt heard for the first time. And I met several other incredible women who had been through the same things. And it really made me feel like I was at home. And you can see in the middle, I have a legislative lobby day photo with David Young back in 2018. So that was one of my highlights. The rest are, the one on the left is DC lobby day. We did a photo shoot for our branding. And then on the right is a survivor school in Cape Cod that I attended the year after. Or is it 2 years? Might have been 2 years. Anyways, next slide. So all of this led me to different opportunities, and you'll see Above and Beyond Cancer is on this list. Bras for the Cause, Madison County, the Cancer Consortium, American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. I mean, you name it. We really encourage survivors to get involved with their local partners as much as they can. And it's not all cervical cancer issues, but it is cancer prevention policy and everything that we can do to prevent cancer. And I think I have one more slide. And the reminder is, advocacy isn't easy, but it's rewarding. And I've learned that over the last several years, you go from fight or flight for, gosh, I think I've gone on to 7 years of fight or flight mode, and I've finally been able to slow down and really kind of process through what this all means and everything I've been able to accomplish with my community partners. It takes a lot of patience and understanding, and you have to be okay with processing through some of the hard stuff because it is going to pop up. You don't know what's going to trigger you when you're doing this work. But it's okay knowing that you can take a step back and say you're not okay because you have a community out there that's willing to help you. But this has come in full circle for me because I started out as a patient, a survivor ambassador, and then now I work for the organization that gave me my voice. So it really truly has been an incredible experience that I wouldn't trade for the world. That's the end of my slideshow, and I
Wow.
figure we could open up.
Well, Morgan, thank you so much for taking on the obligation of the living. I mean, you had a choice when you got through your cancer treatment. You could have put it behind you and tried to forget about it and make sure nobody else knew about it and move on with your life, or you could choose the path you have chosen to allow the wisdom that you have learned in your cancer journey, not just to illuminate your life, but to help illuminate the path of others and to help others. So thank you for taking that path, that obligation of the living to help others. Really appreciate it. Thanks for telling your story. And I know many issues you touched on, and some of the issues. So for example, HPV, for those who don't know, is the human papilloma virus, and virtually 100% of cervix cancers. And for those who maybe don't know, the cervix is part of the uterus that's up at the top of the vagina, and the HPV, human papilloma virus, causes cancer. And we now know that we can prevent cervix cancer and 4 or 5 other types of cancers caused by the HPV virus. But I was just kind of blown away that you kind of got all the way through your cancer treatment and no one had shared with you the knowledge that this is a cancer that's caused by a virus.
Yeah. I think one of the parts when I think about that is, you know, I think there was an assumption that I knew, that I understood, but not everyone's going to know that. And I literally came back from survivor school and went through my medical records just to see. And sure enough, the marker for HPV-16 was there. So I actually discovered that in my own medical charts. And after I realized that, I felt like I became a little more empowered with my story, that I understood what was going on, and kind of understood more of why treatment was decided in the way it was.
Mhm.
So it was a huge part of healing too.
And you also touched on several issues that are really very pertinent for young individuals. So we use the phrase, and you know it, but let's use the phrase AYA, adolescent young adults. So those individuals, maybe starting from age 15 to age 39, those are the years that people are fertile as well. And you touched on the issues related to fertility. So going
Mhm.
through chemotherapy and radiation therapy adversely affects fertility. As you mentioned, had you had conversations about it, there are things that can be done, very expensive, time-consuming things that can be done if you put off your treatment and harvest eggs and then store eggs. And sometime in the future, you may thaw them out and fertilize them. But those are such a complicated conversation to have when you've just been told at age 24 or that you have cancer and you need chemotherapy and radiation therapy. Uh,
Yeah, it's
and
super overwhelming, and to go in without having the information needed to make those decisions is really hard. You know, you feel like you have a ticking time bomb inside of you, and you're not sure if the cancer is going to spread quickly, if it's something that can allow you some time, if your hormones are going to feed into the tumor. There's all these different uh, issues, and then add financial toxicity on top of that, because you're just starting out or had just finished school, and here you are having all these bills coming at you, and you just really can't afford it. What are the resources out there? There's so many questions.
right. And then had somebody really sat down with you to talk about the fertility, you talk about financial toxicity. In this day and age, it's not clear that insurance will even pay for the harvesting of the eggs, the storing of the eggs, for some possibility in the future you may want to use them. And all of the decisions you're making around treatment and your career and getting life in order, and then the idea of having a thoughtful conversation about the procedures to save some eggs. That's
Yeah,
just totally overwhelming.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Another element you touched on is, you're just getting started in a career. You've got your master's in social work, you've got a social work job, and you're trying to launch a career while going through um, cancer treatment that's very time consuming and in some ways debilitating.
Yeah, so my story, so I was working at a dental office when I was diagnosed, and I had just started going back to school to become a social worker. And I continued full-time schooling at DMAC. I went back for an associate's to further my admission into the undergraduate program at the University of Iowa. But even then, you know, it was a lot to take on, and I think in a way school was an escape. But my work suffered, my career. Um, I wasn't really working as much, and then it hit financially, and things became pretty pretty tight with money. Um, and I remember I don't like admitting this because as a young adult, like you haven't been out in the real world for long, and you don't have that much experience. Most people don't have much experience when it comes to paying bills and the medical system and everything. But when you get those letters that are like, pay this, pay it now, like it becomes daunting, and credit card debt tends to go up. So that was an issue that I dealt with. And had I known to talk to a patient navigator or a social worker to help find a way to alleviate some of the financial strain, I think I would have been in a better position.
Hmm. Yeah, what an education you got in the United States healthcare system and the way it works. I'm just so sorry to say that you're not alone and that still happens. So, with your experience, if you were a social worker at a medical center and a financial and patient navigator, how would you navigate someone who was who was going through the path that you went through starting in 2015? How would you assist them on their journey?
Yeah, I think, I think a consultation with a patient navigator or a social worker should be mandatory for treatment. And knowing that they can provide those resources of financial and even emotional support. They know, most of them know where the programs are, or they know how to find them. So just going through the process of meeting with someone and then listening to their needs, because not everyone is going to need the same thing. That's why cancer is so unique for the individual. Um, but yeah, I think it just starts with that consultation piece and hearing from the patient themselves, not necessarily from the care team.
Yes. And so we believe it's really important to have on the team at the cancer center, not just the people who kill the cancer cells with surgery, radiation, and chemo, but nurse navigators, social workers, financial counselors, mental health counselors, dietitians to help along the way. But I would tell you that unfortunately, your situation is not alone. You might even be going through care at a system that has those resources, but if no one connects you to them, you don't know that they're there. And I just feel so sorry that we have a system that allows someone like you to go through what you went through without connecting to all of those resources that all of us that take care of cancer patients know are as important as the drops of chemotherapy and the radiation beams and the surgery.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk a little bit now about the issue you advocate for, cervix cancer. I always like to look at cancer kind of from a continuum. So and by the way, Morgan and I have had the opportunity to go to the State House and to go to Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. together as advocates with the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. So we've had the chance to be cancer fighters together. Whenever I look at cancer, I always think about preventing the cancers that can be prevented. So we're going to talk a bit about the HPV vaccination. I think about finding cancers at an early stage. We call that screening. And we can talk about Pap smears and cervical cancer screening, and then talk about treatment and access to care, and a little bit about the demographics of cervix cancer that you became an expert in without any desire to become an expert.
Yes, and I'm still learning through this all because it's such a complex thing. When you have so many different systems that need to address the disparities that are happening. But
So Morgan, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
Let's talk a little bit about the HPV. So maybe, and I'll help you here. I mean, you probably know more about some of this than I do, but for the audience, and we've got a large studio audience here listening to us live, and we've also got a large audience that's streaming. What is HPV virus, and how does that cause cancer? And then knowing that HPV virus can cause cancer, how does that lead to a way to prevent cervix cancer?
Yep. So HPV is the human papillomavirus, and almost all of us will have HPV at some point in our lives. Unfortunately, there are some of us, like me, that develop high risk HPV, and it develops into cancer. But we have a vaccine that protects us against those high risk strains. Um, we know that there's hundreds of those strains out there, but these are the ones responsible for causing cancer.
And just out of curiosity, I don't know off the top of my head when the first patients got HPV vaccinations, when it became routine. Had you been vaccinated? And typically the vaccinations are given to young individuals around age 11 or 12.
Yep. So the first one actually came out in 2006. And I was 16 at that time. I was offered the vaccine, but I actually just shared this because it's part of my story that I don't tell as much as I should. But I was vaccine hesitant, and I told my mom no because it was too new. She was very adamant about me getting vaccinated because she saw the potential of cancer prevention. Ultimately, I won because I'm 16 and I know everything. And I would never get that cancer. But it turns out almost 10 years later, I developed cervical cancer. And they have actually pushed the age back to age 9 and 10 to start early to make the efficacy more apparent for our upcoming generations.
Have you had the opportunity to talk to adolescents or teenagers?
I have actually. As a Survivor ambassador, I went out and partnered with Emily Hoffman, who is my partner in advocacy here in Iowa, and also a volunteer with Above and Beyond Cancer. But we partnered and went to health fairs at schools and did kind of like a trivia game of HPV facts, and the kids are very knowledgeable and they're aware of what's out there for information.
And for those who don't know, the HPV vaccine can prevent not only cervix cancer, but vaginal cancer, vulvar cancer, cancer of the penis, and oral pharynx cancer. So the oral pharynx is back where the tonsils live. And in women, the HPV virus is more likely to cause cancer of the cervix. In men, the HPV virus is more likely to cause cancer of the tonsil, but it's the same virus. And so when the HPV vaccination first came out, it was promoted for girls,
Mm-hmm.
which was really unfortunate because number one, even if only women got cancer, you need to vaccinate the whole herd, not just half the herd, when we're talking about herd immunity. But second, HPV virus causes cancer in men. And this year in the United States, there will be more men with HPV cancer of the tonsil than there will be women with HPV cancer of the cervix.
Yes.
Um, so a little bit of HPV vaccination knowledge. And as Morgan said, we've now moved the vaccination to earlier, 9 or 10. And it's still one of those things where it's not mandatory. Schools make some vaccinations mandatory, and for some reason, this one is still one of those optional. And the most important characteristic of patients of individuals who get vaccinated are their doctors recommended. They don't
Absolutely.
just say, well, you can take it or leave it. It's like, well, it's optional, but you should take it. And here's why I, as your doctor, recommend you take it.
Yeah, so we have to have the conversation of cancer prevention. And the reason is a study came out post-pandemic. I shouldn't say post because we're still in the middle of the pandemic, but there's been a 71% drop in the vaccination rates of 7 to 17-year-olds. And that includes Tdap and meningitis. So we do have a lot of work to get back on track. And that's part of what the HPV Roundtable does. They have a lot of great information that if anyone's wondering, use a credible source like them. They have a lot out there.
Morgan, let's transition to the next step. So we talked about prevention. That's the HPV vaccination. Let's talk about screening, early detection. First, let me say that there is not an early detection for tonsil cancer. There's not a Pap smear of the tonsil, but there is a well-known screening for cervix cancer, and that is the Pap smear.
Yes.
I'll let you share some knowledge and information about what is a Pap smear, how is it done, and what's the recommended guidelines.
Yep, sure. So the Pap test is a test that you gather some cells. Anyone with a cervix, I should say, go in and have a pelvic exam, and then they take a swab to collect cells, and that's the Pap test. And depending on where you are at in your guidelines, then you will typically have an HPV co-test to help identify if you have an active HPV infection. And the Pap test will test for abnormal cells. So a Pap test can result in abnormal cells, and they're usually ranked from SIN 1 to SIN 3, and SIN 3 is severe. And then treatment depends on that. So, I mean, there's different options to treat abnormal cells before they're full-blown cancer too.
So the general principle is that during a pelvic exam, the provider can just scrape a few cells off the outside of the cervix, and those cells can be looked at microscopically and evaluated. Are they atypical? Are they malignant? Or are they just kind of somewhere in between? And also, do they contain the HPV virus? So you can have the HPV virus, but most individuals do have the HPV virus, and most individuals do not develop cancer. But
Correct.
knowing that you have HPV puts you at a higher risk, and that you might be screened more frequently. But the test is, correct me if I'm wrong, because I've obviously never had a pelvic exam, but relatively speaking, other than the kind of the embarrassment and awkwardness of getting in that position, not particularly painful, and it's just is scraping off, and even scraping is probably too violent of a word. It's just removing a few cells from the outside of the cervix, and then they're looked at by a pathologist in the laboratory a few days later. It often can take a week or two to get the results back, because most of the time a screening is evaluating a person who does not have symptoms for cancer. So it's not like it's an urgent thing. So what part of the problems with Pap smears is getting the information, and then getting the information back to the patient, because they're already gone on with their life and aren't planning on coming back to the doctor for another year. So tracking down the patient if it's an abnormal test is an important part of the medical process of then getting the patient back in for further workup if necessary.
Yes, yes, and I do agree. The Pap test doesn't generally hurt, and it's usually pretty quick. So if you can, get those feet in the stirrups because
Yes,
it matters.
it saves lives. It saves
It
lives.
does. It does.
So by the time one has symptoms, then it's not a screening test. Then it's a diagnostic test to determine why does someone have symptoms. So a true screening, whether it's a screening mammogram or a screening Pap smear, is done for individuals who don't have symptoms. But by virtue of being a woman, you're at risk for breast cancer and you're at risk for cervix cancer. So all women should be screened for both breast cancer and cervix cancer.
Yes. And I will say, guidelines can be confusing, and they're always changing because we have science and technology that is always uh, improving our treatment, our prevention, our vaccinations. But definitely have that conversation with your medical provider on what you should be following. The American Cancer Society has their guidelines on their website. And obviously, if something feels off to you, that is something that I advocate. Go get checked if you don't feel like something's right or not right,
Yeah. And Morgan does make a good point. So it used to be screening guidelines. Oh, you just once a year you got a Pap smear. Well, we follow the science, and science now is that if you've had several negative ones, then you don't need one every year. But what I like to say is the best thing you can do is have a primary care doctor that is your partner in health. So I don't know, but I bet there are very few parents that know exactly which vaccines their kids are supposed to get on which days. During which
It's
year. It's
confusing.
so confusing, and some of the screening guidelines become that way too. So, and they change, but fortunately, in this computer age, the guidelines, your doctor has the guidelines and they're instantly updated. So rather than you memorizing what the guidelines are for how frequently you get a mammogram, or how frequently you get a Pap smear, or how often your kids are getting vaccinated at what age for what diseases, have a good primary care doctor that will be your partner in helping you keep track of all of that.
Yes. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
So we've talked about prevention and we've talked about screening. If the screening test shows cancer, then we're talking about treatment. And one of the characteristics, let's shift to a global perspective, because I know Morgan is very much interested in the global perspective. So cervix cancer, as Morgan can attest to, happens in the United States, but cervix cancer is a greater health issue in low and middle income countries where HPV may not be available for prevention, where screening may not be readily available, and where early access to healthcare may not be available. So in some lower and middle income countries, cervix cancer can be the greatest type of cancer death that occurs, and supersedes even lung cancer in some countries. Morgan, do you want to share anything about the global perspective and some of the programs you're involved with looking at the global perspective of cervix cancer?
Yeah, so there's 500,000 women worldwide that get diagnosed with cervical cancer each year. There was a statistic of a woman dies of cervical cancer every 2 minutes. So it kind of gives you a pretty eye-opening statistic. And we know that Hispanic and Black women are affected more than Caucasian women when it comes to cervical cancer, and Black women are dying at twice the rate of Caucasian women. So there's a lot of disparities that still exist. And Cervivor is an organization that has a global reach, and we empower women worldwide to share their stories and educate the general public on cervical cancer and HPV, so we can make that change happen across the globe. And we partner with International Human Papilloma Virus Society that are on a mission to end the stigma on HPV. We have community partners all over the world that we're working closely with to spread awareness and hopefully, protect future generations.
And you also touched upon some themes that we talked about that are of particular interest to young adults. So it's not just killing the cancer cells. When found early, cervix cancer is very highly curable. If it's not found early, then the chances to cure the cancer diminish with the stage. And we talked about other issues for young adults, including fertility and career and relationships and the stigma. And all of those are things that you personally and your organization, Cervivor, are working on.
Yes, and it's a nice reminder for others that haven't walked the cancer journey, maybe yet or ever, that cancer isn't over when treatment ends. It's a lifelong issue, and there's many of us in the cancer community who were diagnosed at a very young age, and we deal with the ramifications of treatment, post-treatment side effects. Osteoporosis. I have lymphedema, so it's something that's not curable, but I can maintain and prevent it from getting worse. I mean, there's a number of issues, and a lot of it can be prevented with making sure you get your screenings on time and be proactive with your health, ask those questions, really be your doctor's partner in this, because shared decision making is so very important. We're fortunate to have it.
And you brought up a really important, and that is the lingering side effects. So I am hopeful that you are cured of your cancer and you never have to face cancer. But um, as you've already attested to, you have lifelong physical, emotional, perhaps financial, psychological, philosophical, spiritual issues that cancer survivors face forever. And so we've just begun a cancer survivorship clinic, and the clinic isn't just about, oh, you're free of cancer. It's about what are these lingering physical, psychological, emotional, financial issues, and how can we best deal with them.
Yes, I appreciate organizations like Above and Beyond Cancer that really focus on the mind, body, and spirit aspect of cancer, because it's not just the tumor or, uh, the issue that they're treating. It is the full person.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. We are going to go to the Q&A part. So we've got Chris is looking for any questions that come from those people watching us virtually, but we've got actually a quite large studio audience. So let's have some questions for Morgan. Poon.
Hi, Morgan. Hey, someone's watching and they may say, okay, I haven't got my kids vaccinated. 17-year-old, 18-year-old. Is there an age where they can still get that HPV vaccine?
Yep. So the HPV vaccine is recommended from ages 9 up until 26, and it has been expanded by the FDA. But the sooner you can get them in to be vaccinated, the better efficacy they'll have against the virus.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Morgan, and we can look this up, and I will admit I might be off on years, but I think the FDA now permits, under circumstances, vaccination even into the early 30s.
Up until 45.
Up until 45. So
Yep,
it is still possible. Thank you because it's expanded over time. So it's most effective at the young age. So once individuals become sexually active, we become exposed to HPV. The best opportunity to prevent HPV-related cancers is to get vaccinated before the age at which one becomes sexually active. So the younger, the better. But in situations where someone hasn't not been sexually active, then a vaccination at a later age may be very, very effective.
And I do want to point out that individuals can contract HPV through intimate skin-to-skin contact. You don't have to have sexual activity in order to get HPV. So,
thank you, Morgan.
Yes.
Thank you. Yep.
Another question. Is Pap Smear every 5 years?
Right now, the American Cancer Society is recommending, depending on age, that it should be every, sorry, I'm looking it up just to make sure I'm not telling you the wrong thing, because my mind is, so age 25 to 65 should have a primary HPV test every 5 years, but the Pap test alone every 3 years. So definitely check with your provider to make sure what is most accurate for your age bracket and your history, because that takes into account too.
Next question.
Yes. I don't know if am I coming through. I really appreciate you mentioning what's it like when you're being diagnosed. I think it's a great team that MercyOne's put together. I met was introduced to all the doctors, including the one here, Dr. Deming. But I'm glad I had my husband with me because it was like that. You described it perfectly. I felt like, sorry, Dr. Deming, I was listening to the teacher, wah, 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 wah. And I
Mhm.
go, what was his name again? Dr. Deming? You know, I mean, was trying to get to memorize their names to get to know who they were, and got the counselor help in. And you're right, the nurse navigators make a big difference.
They
And
really do.
I'm 3 months cancer free, yay,
Yay.
breast cancer. But it is a struggle. You go through all this, and then once you've completed the treatment, you're still dealing with the after effect. And but I think a question I was going to ask, I think was already answered. Being that for women who are menopausing, a lot of times the doctors don't do the Pap smears, and you don't request it because you figured you're done with that. So my question is, and maybe Dr. Demi can answer that as well. You still should be getting cervix examination after, like I'm 58. I mean, so is that still recommended? I didn't know that.
Yes, and part of it, and I apologize, I should have brought all the different guidelines with me, and it depends how many negatives you've had and whether you've had HPV, and that factors in. But yes, if you still have a uterus and a cervix and you're sexually active, then there is a role for screening, and that for screening of cervix cancer is a Pap smear. If you've had a hysterectomy, you still can get cancer of the upper vagina. It's less frequent. And there was a time where we were doing routine Pap smears of the lining of the vagina in women that's had hysterectomy. Those recommendations have changed because it is so uncommon. And again, the recommendations aren't to do everything for everybody, but to do screening in those situations where there is where there's a likelihood you may find it in a certain number of people. So again, the even if we had these recommendations right in front of us today, they could change next week. So making sure you have a primary care physician that is part of your care team so that you get not just the cervix cancer screening, the colon cancer screening, those guidelines change. If you're a smoker, the lung cancer screening, the mammography, those guidelines change as well. So rather than trying to memorize all the guidelines, have a trusting relationship with a primary care physician who will keep track of all of the screening that will help find cancers that you might be a risk for.
Now, genetic testing, does that pick up those kinds of things?
So, question about genetic testing. Actually, the whole landscape of screening is going to change this year. There is a blood test now that can screen for 29 different cancers. And we're on the verge of going from screening differently for each type of cancer to perhaps in the next few years a blood test that will screen for multiple cancers. So stay tuned. That is getting FDA approved. That's sometimes referred to as a liquid biopsy or as a blood test screening for cancer. And you're going to be hearing a lot about it this year in 2022 as that becomes FDA approved, and there will be more information about that. Other questions? We have, yes.
My question is, I heard that you said some doctors refuse or are hesitant to give the HPV vaccine. Would you be able to put some light on why?
Morgan, I don't know if you heard the question. The question was that she understands that some doctors are reluctant to offer HPV vaccines to their young patients.
Yeah, so to put it quite bluntly, providers are uncomfortable with having a discussion about a vaccine that was kind of branded as a sexual health type vaccine, and it's not about sex. It's about cancer prevention, and we just have to have providers get a little more comfortable with having those uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So it was sort of framed, well, this you get when you're on the verge of becoming sexually active, and that somehow getting vaccinated will give a young person the impression they are now, okay, well, now I can become sexually active. And it's really not about when someone becomes sexually active. It's about how do you prevent cancer in the future by getting a vaccination at a point in time prior to becoming where intimate contact becomes common. So the fact that there's intimacy involved in the transfer of the virus created this perception on the part of some docs that giving the vaccine somehow was promoting uh, premarital sexual sex, and it's obviously that's not the case. And all good doctors that I know, just like you give meningitis vaccinations, before kids go to college, you give vaccinations for all sorts of diseases. HPV is very common, universal. Almost everyone will get the HPV virus, and vaccinating against the virus will help prevent cancers and save lives. Other questions? Yes.
I just have one quick comment. I definitely applaud you for mentioning that you chose not to get vaccinated when you were at 16. It was new at that time. You telling your story now, hopefully people will see you, parents that are on the fence of getting their young ones vaccinated, can see that this is definitely a vaccination that prevents cancer. And good for you. To keep telling your story. That's amazing.
Thank you. And part of that is because I see the regret that my parents hold on to because I did not get vaccinated. They wanted to protect me, and I'm thankful that they allowed me to make my decision, and it empowered me to continue to take care of my health. But I didn't know everything that came along with it. You think you know everything, but you really, really don't. So of course, I will tell that part of my story as much as possible.
Yes, and that's true at 16 and at 60. We don't know everything. Well, Morgan, thank you so much. Thank you for the courage you have to be vulnerable, to tell your story, to make a difference, to save lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks everyone for attending. Those of you that attended via live stream or here in our live studio audience, if you know someone that this program would be of benefit to, please let them know that this is available on demand. It will be posted as a video podcast at the Above and Beyond Cancer YouTube channel, and it will also be available on demand at the MercyOne Cancer Center website. Thanks again for joining us. Please join us again next week.